like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll. Whatever my lot thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul.
In our scripture tonight, it was one that was fond to us. We know what it is, John 4:24. And we go there quite often, and usually we do not have to, because we know in this passage, and we almost know it by heart every time, God's a spirit. And they that worship Him must worship Him in spirit and in truth. And it almost seems as every time we gather together, that's something we could run through our minds to remind ourselves. What we're getting ready to participate in, number one, is important. Number two is defined by God. And number three, man can mess it up. So it's important for what we're doing. But when we think about this passage, it's much deeper than what's happening here. There was a time in which was being described here, the hour was to come. And I want you to think about this for just a moment. Worship is not the only thing that was getting ready to come. There were so many vast, complex things that were getting ready to take place in these people's lives, and we usually take that passage and we go talking about worship. But you know, there are a lot of things that happen before worship that leads up to the worship assembly. And we talked about a few of those things in our morning class this morning in the auditorium. There are all sorts of things that lead up to a worship assembly. When we think about our worship assembly, number one, we have to think about our mindset when we get here. Did we prepare ourselves the day before to come to worship? Sunday comes every 7 days. And Saturday comes every 7 days too. We know what we're getting ready to do. Have we taken the time? Were we prepared Sunday morning to be at worship? I'm not talking about what we're wearing. Did we have the right clothes laid out? Yes, when we need to put on clothes, we need to be appropriate inside of worship. But did we prepare the mind? Did we get in a mindset that gets us ready so when we know we come into here, going to worship, worshiping the Almighty God? Did we prepare ourselves in what we're getting ready to do in the midst of that worship? Do you prepare your mind for what's going to be upon this table in the mornings? For those that need to partake of tonight, is your mind prepared? Did you prepare yourself in what you were going to give unto the Lord this week? Did you prepare yourself to sing? Did you prepare yourself to pray? Did you prepare yourself for what we're going to study? Now, those are all things that are important in the midst of a worship assembly. But you know, there are a lot of other things that happen in the midst of a worship assembly, aren't there? We know the New Testament tells us that there may be people who are getting ready to prepare themselves to go to worship. And in its context in the book of Matthew, it was those who were preparing to take their offering into the altar. Remember in the book of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the church had not been established yet. These were people who were preparing to go into worship, but before they got to worship, they realized, so-and-so has aught against me. And the passage teaches us to go and make that right. Even tells them to leave their gifts before the altar and make it correct. So we know when we begin to think about worship, there's many complex things that come into our minds. But what else could we be talking about? You know, I find it interesting in the Old Testament. It's probably one of my favorite places to study. And we studied out of it this morning, so I thought it'd be very appropriate to do so again tonight. I want us to go to Numbers chapter 16. Because in the midst of Numbers chapter 16, there's a struggle that's happening. And it's not really a back and forth struggle. It's a struggle that really came from the mind of one person. And we use that introduction into worship to get us to the point in which we're beginning with Numbers chapter 16. Because there was a man in Numbers chapter 16. He didn't like how things were going. So he had decided unto himself, and he got some of his friends together, and they banded together, and they came up with a plan. There's a reason why I decided that we need to study this tonight. I've been mentioning the name Korah quite a bit. Just as passing in various classes and maybe even various sermons, we've mentioned Korah. But I want us to notice three things that happen here. In the midst of what these people were doing in their lives, worship was a very big part of it. And in the midst of what we do in our lives, worship should be a very crucial part of what we do. There were some people in Numbers chapter 16, they didn't like how things were going. They wanted things to be different. And we're going to notice three things that happen in Numbers chapter 16. There are the accusers and what they say. There are the accused and what they're going to say. And then there's the answer and what it has to say. And I like this account very specific because it teaches us God's got these things under control. Sometimes we forget that fact. God designed His body. And Numbers chapter 16 is a really good idea for us to see that God has designed things the way they needed to be. We look at verse 1, we find here, and I just want us to read the first two words. Now, Korah. Let's pause for a moment. We begin our discussion and we already know what's getting ready to happen. Most likely this is the individual that's going to be the one that's doing the accusing. Or he's at least the one who wasn't happy with the way things were going at the moment. We see who his father was. We see some information about his family. And we see who they were. And we find in verse 2 exactly what they wanted to do. Read with me verse 2. And they rose up before Moses with certain of the children of Israel, 250 princes of the assembly, famous in the congregation, men of renown. Verse 3. And they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron and said unto them, Ye take too much upon you. Seeing all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them, wherefore then lift ye up yourselves above the congregation of the Lord. We could automatically stop and deduce what the problem was. And that's pretty simple as we read verses 2 and 3. They didn't like it that Moses and Aaron were the two in the spotlight. For some reason, it really burnt them up. They just didn't like it. And we can automatically deduce that for some reason these individuals, they were able to talk. 250 men. I love how it describes them. They were famous in the congregation. They were well known. People knew who they were. People knew what they were going to do. People thought they were great. I love how it describes them as well. They were men of renown. They were good men. They did what was right. In the case of the Korah here, he was the chief leader against this revolt, we can call it. He brought these people in the midst of the assembly. He wanted to know why Moses and Aaron had did these things. There's something interesting I want us to note as we get going. Moses and Aaron had something very crucial in connection with Korah. They were both from the tribe of Levi. They were both from the same people. It's obvious unto us that Korah knew who Moses was. He knew who Aaron was too. And it's very, very, very likely that Moses and Aaron, well, they know who Korah was. The idea is not very difficult here. To think that a man that's honorable, to think that a man's very ambitious, he looked upon his fellow people and he saw something he didn't like. I want you to notice something. He didn't do this alone. There's a reason why I started out with us introducing worship and talking about the importance of it. And the reason why we're looking at this. All of these things that are happening in this passage and the things in which we do amongst ourselves involve our worship. Here were people who did not like what was going on. And what they were getting ready to do for that day, it was going to greatly disrupt what was getting ready to happen. They didn't act alone. It was Korah, Dathan, and Abram, which we find in the context of our passage. And then these 250 men from various tribes upon their side. He describes who they were exactly. They were princes. That meant they were men, at least unto us, they were respectable men. They were honorable to some degree. In most cases, they were very bright and intelligent men. And somehow these three individuals, Korah, Dathan, and Abram, were able to skew things. The names of these individuals is not given, nor the tribe in which they belonged to. Most likely, these 250 men, they were not just from the tribe of Levi. Korah would have been smart enough. He's getting ready to go up against Moses and Aaron to get a representative from each of the 12. There were chiefs in the congregation. They were leaders in the midst of the congregation. They weren't the only ones. We read that sometimes when we see that they were princes of the congregation. It gives us the idea they were the only ones there. There would have been some who would have not went with Korah and Dathan and Abram. And here's their accusation. You're doing too much. Now, it may have been that when he began, they just wanted to share some of the responsibilities in which Moses and Aaron had. May have been. It may have been in his thinking, he thought, I can do that better. It may have been something that Korah began in his mind. There's a different way we can do this. I want us to pause in our consideration of what's happening, because as we discuss it from verse 1 to verse 3, things have moved very swiftly. But think about how long this actually took to take place. This uprising, we may call it, did not happen overnight. There was a significant span of time in which Korah decided, in which Dathan decided, and Abram decided, we're going to stand against Moses. Moses and Aaron, you do too much. If you look at the middle of part of verse 3, you take too much upon you. Seeing all the congregation are holy, and we start to understand what he wants. And we start to see what his accusation is. Here is a man named Korah. He's speaking. He has 252 people behind him in his speech in which he's making. And evidently Moses and Aaron, they're there. They're gathered in the midst of the people. And they say directly unto them, you have decided that you're going to be the one to do all of these things, and you've made these decisions on your own. Now, I want us to note as a side note, Korah forgot history. Korah had forgotten what had happened in his lifetime. See, Moses was not the one who put himself in a position of prominence. And it was not Aaron in which put himself in the position in which he was going to hold. And it was not going to be Aaron to put himself in the position in which he was going to hold in the future. God was the one who placed Moses there. God was the one who placed Aaron there. And Moses and Aaron, as far as we know in the context of what's happening, were doing what God wanted. So here's the accusation. You are doing too much of your own decision. Let's see how they react. Read with me verses 8 through 11, and this is the depiction of how Moses and Aaron react. There's a second reason why I wanted us to study this, not just so we learn that there are things in which we should not do in the midst of an assembly together, but I want us to see how we can react when things happen to us. Because let's face it, there are a bunch of humans in this room. And many times we're the ones to foul things up. How do we react to those type of situations? It gives us a wonderful depiction. Look at verse 8. And Moses said unto Korah, Hear, I pray you, ye sons of Levi. He's begging Korah to take a moment to listen. He's begging Korah to take a moment, reason with me. Notice how Moses doesn't begin his conversation back to Korah. Moses does not begin to say, I've not done that. He doesn't jump to a defense. Not right away. Moses does not say, well, that's not your decision. Moses does not say, you're just an arrogant young man. But Moses brings him to his side and said, listen. Not with a condescending tone, but he begs him, he entreats him to come in and listen. I like that he says, ye sons of Levi. This gives us an idea here that Moses is respecting those in which he's confronted with. Remember, there are 253 people that are presenting to Moses and Aaron the problem in which they thought existed, which was never a problem in the begin with. And he begins by saying, listen, and he shows them the respect that they deserve. So let's notice verse 9. It seemeth it a small thing unto you that the God of Israel hath separated from you the congregation of Israel to bring near to himself, to do the service of the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the congregation to minister unto them. And he hath brought thee near to him, and all thy brethren, the sons of Levi, with thee, and seek ye the priesthood also? For which cause both thou and all thy company are gathered together against the Lord. And what is Aaron that ye murmur against him? Notice he presents a very simple message to them. Why are you doing this? I love how he begins in verse 8. I respect you. I'm hearing you. Now hear me. He goes into verse 9. Does it seem strange to you that you, Dathan and Abram, and some of those in which are behind you, have been placed into the tribe of Levi? Is it not enough for you to serve the Lord in the capacity in which you've been given? I believe of all the tribes in the Old Testament, when talking about the group of Israel, Levi has to be my favorite. Because remember, these were the people, even though their job may have been the hardest, but they were the ones in which carried the things of God. They were the ones in which were to be in a closer relationship with God than any other tribe that existed. They were the ones in which were able to minister unto the people. They were the ones that were the center of everything that was happening. And notice what these people are saying. Moses, you're doing too much. I love how he depicts it. Does it seem to you that it's a small thing that the God of Israel, notice how he promotes God. He's not just God. He's the God of Israel. Is it a small thing to you that God is doing this with you? That's the indication of what Moses is saying to them. And you're standing before the congregation and you're allowed to minister unto them. I love verse 10. You're able to be closer unto God. It says here, and he hath brought thee near to him, and all thy brethren, the sons of Levi, with thee, and ye seek the priesthood also. Korah and his followers had just rebuked Moses and Aaron. What was Moses to do? We don't see this happening very often in the Old Testament. At least with Moses, not very much. But we do see it. And he depicts unto them all of these things. I want you to notice something about Moses. And we read this every time we see Moses existing. And many of the times in which we see Moses is there, the people of God are there, those in which are serving the people of God are there. And many times we read of these people, and we could go through the book of Numbers as a specific requirement of us. And we could go through this book, and we could see Moses being there with the people. The people are being served by the tribe of Levi. But somehow, in some way, the people are going to decide they don't need God anymore. In almost every of those occasions, almost every single one of them, when the people of God stray away from God, what is Moses' response? He goes to God on their behalf. And that's what we're going to see happening with these individuals. We're going to see them. We're going to see Moses coming to the Lord for them. We're going to see him trying to calm them. We're going to see him try to take care of them. He's going to be compassionate to them. Now we get to see the answer of this. So two great things have been contrasted for us. Number one, there's Korah, Dathan, and Abram, and the 250 individuals that are with them. They're saying unto Moses, "You're doing too much on your own." Then there's Korah, Dathan, and Abram, and the 250 listening to Moses, and Aaron most likely by his side, and they are pleading with them, begging with them, "Is what God gave you not enough?" Now I find that to be two interesting contrasts, but we're going to see all of this play out, and this happens from verse 12 all the way down to verse 49. There was a sign to be given. If we look at verse 5, he spake unto Korah and all his company, saying, "And even tomorrow the Lord will show all who are his, and who is holy, and he will cause them to come near unto him. And he will cause them to whom he hath chosen, will he cause to come near unto him. This do, take your censers, Korah, and all your company, and put fire therein." I want you to notice Moses is instructing them, the answer you're looking for, it comes from God. And that's when we see that depiction of Moses. "And Moses said unto Korah, Hear, I pray you." Moses knew what the answer was going to be. We have a group of men who are going up against a God who have saved them many times. We have a group of people who are going up against Moses, who has prayed for them many times. And we have a group of people going up against Aaron, who in the significance of this battle that's happening has done nothing in its consideration. And here was their response. Don't do this. Don't destroy yourself. I find Numbers chapter 16 really, in my opinion, to be a book about compassion. Now, yes, the results are going to be very drastic, but the leading part of the book is Moses pleading with these individuals, all 253 of them, and begging them, don't do this. So let's see the answer. The answer begins really in verse 12. "And Moses sent to call Dathan and Abram, the sons of Eliab, which said, We will not come up." These two individuals knew what we're doing is wrong. Moses called to them. They would not come. Verse 13, "Is it a small thing that thou hast brought us up out of a land that flows with milk and honey, to kill us in the wilderness, except thou make thyself altogether a prince over us? Moreover, thou hast not brought us into a land that floweth with milk and honey, or given us an inheritance of the fields and vineyards. Wilt thou not come, or put out the eyes of these men? Will thou not come up?" Here these two, they knew better. They weren't going to go face Moses. They knew what was right. They knew what was wrong. So they send back the message, "You've not done what you promised." They go in a personal attack mode, and they prepare themselves to try to do anything that they could. The sign was given. They knew what was getting ready to happen. Moses is still trying to plead with them, but they're going to stick to their group. They have this idea that their group is going to be stronger than their God, and they're going to be sorely mistaken. It was these men also that would have just remembered Aaron's two dead sons, and they would never started this uproar. Korah was told that tomorrow he and his company would come together and they would bring their censers. And that's how this was going to happen. I really find it intriguing that Dathan and Abram would not come. Moses again is going to intercede for these people. But we see something interesting happening. In verse 15, and Moses was very wroth and said unto the Lord, respect not their offering, I have not taken one from of them, neither I have hurt one of them. And Moses said unto Korah, be thou and all thy company before the Lord, thou and they and Aaron tomorrow. Moses knew. Tomorrow, since you will not listen, you will unfortunately learn. And that's what happened. If we look in verse 17, we see the beginning of this. And take every man his censer and put in his censer in them, and bring them before the Lord, every man his censer, 250 censers, thou also and Aaron, and each of you in his censer. And they took every man his censer, and put fire in them, and laid incense thereon, and stood in the door of the tabernacle of the congregation with Moses and Aaron. And Korah gathered all the congregation against them into the door of the tabernacle and the congregation, and the glory of the Lord appeared unto all the congregation. It was at this point that everything that happened was going to come to light. I want you to notice verse 20. And the Lord spake unto Moses and said unto Aaron, separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. I want you to notice their response. Look at verse 22 very carefully. And they fell upon their faces and said, O God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and wilt thou be wroth with all the congregation? How do they have that attitude? Here they are, everyone seemingly is standing against Moses and Aaron, and here is Moses and Aaron's response. When God says, separate ye from them, they plead for those individuals' lives. Would we plead for our enemies' lives even though we thought they were our friends the entire time? Would we beg for them? Would we hate for what was getting ready to happen unto them? Moses did not. And the Lord spake unto Moses in verse 23 and verse 24, speak unto the congregation, saying, get up from them, from about the tabernacle of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And Moses rose up and went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. And he spake unto the congregation, saying, depart, I pray you, from the tents of these wicked men, and touch nothing of theirs, lest ye be consumed in their sins. The answer has been given. The 250 as well is not going to be being described. Dathan and Abram and Korah all going to be destroyed. The 250 not going to fare well either. Here's the depiction and what we're trying to see. We had a group of people who were disgruntled. They made up their accusations. They made them as strong as they could. And they went against Moses and Aaron. We have Moses and Aaron and God. Moses and Aaron pleading with all of these individuals, from a personal basis, from a group basis, from an individual basis, even unto the next day, begging them not to do this. And then we have God, who the whole while knows how all of this is going to work out, and He's not going to tolerate this. Then we have all of the people who are watching this happen. All of the people of Israel had gathered together to see what was going to happen against Korah and Moses. I want you to notice that it only took one person to create such an uproar that the worship of the day was destroyed. And that's why we began with worship. And that's where we're ending with these individuals who went against Moses and Aaron being destroyed. It only took one man to convince them, Moses and Aaron, they're doing too much upon themselves. And they've decided all of these things. Why don't we stand up against them? And it took Moses and Aaron, the two people, to beg and to plead, and over again they would not change their minds. So here's the thrust of what we're trying to learn tonight. It only takes one person to destroy a worship assembly. And I want us to understand as we leave tonight, our worship assembly is important. And I know we've in a different sense looked at something in the Old Testament, but their day was disrupted. And just imagine if ours was. Would we be able to turn the switch and be able to sit here in a worship assembly and be ready to worship as we should? Or would we be like most of the congregation of Israel, on pins and needles waiting to see what was getting ready to happen next? What you and I do is important. And what we bring into the worship assembly, it's very important. And everything we do, it affects each other. And Korah, Dathan, and Abram and the 250 found a very important lesson. When God has set things up, man should not try to tear them down. It may be the case tonight that you are not a child of God. You've been here multiple times over and over again. Most likely your family members are Christians, but you've never done such. I want you to know in the midst of this assembly you are very important. Not just because you're the future of what's going to be happening here, but because you are a soul. And all souls are worthy. All souls deserve a chance to be with their Creator, to be with their Maker. If you want to consider that, I'd like to implore you to do so. We're going to sing a song in just a moment, and it gives us a wonderful time to respond. That invitation song is designed to have us look into our lives and see what we've done. And if we find out that we've not done as God would have us to do to become a child of God, we need to make that right. Maybe tonight that you are a child of God. You may have a need to respond to the Lord's invitation. It's not Jonathan's invitation. It never will be. And I hope it never tries to become that same thought. But this is something in which is important unto the Lord. And He's designed His body to have an opportunity for His people to come back unto Him. And that's this moment. If you have a need, why don't you come as together we stand and sing.
When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrow